Hello and welcome to the video version of the award-winning Happier at Work podcast. I'm your host, Aoife O'Brien, and I have a brilliant episode for you today all about personality profiling using Enneagram. It's something that I haven't actually covered on the podcast just yet, something I'm intrigued by, don't know a huge amount about, which is why I have my brilliant guest, Ronan Gallagher. So we talk about three of the types in particular. We talk about emotional intelligence and the subconscious and how our behavior is basically shaped from when we are a child. We're bringing all of this into the workplace with us. So today's episode will help you to understand more about yourself, your behaviors, what might be triggering to you, and what might be the really positive traits associated, maybe some of the challenging traits associated, and what to do about it. So how can you grow in self-awareness to become a more effective individual contributor, a more effective leader? Really know that you're going to enjoy today's episode. Don't forget to leave a comment below and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Ronan, you're so welcome to the Happier at Work podcast. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time now. I have dived into your book and I'm really keen to understand a little bit more detail what it is you do, how you got to doing what it is that you do, and what we're going to be talking about today.
Thanks, Aoife, and thanks so much for having me. So if I've been a lawyer now for 18 years. I've worked mostly in financial services world. I've also been delivering soft skills training and talks and workshops for about 15 years of my professional life. So in various areas: negotiation, communication, emotional intelligence, personality types. And I suppose in around 2019, Aoife, I made the decision, and I suppose based on what's going to make me most fulfilled in life, where do I go next? I decided to get away from full-time legal practice and go into consultancy on a part-time basis, which would allow me then to focus a little bit more on my people training. During that move, I wrote a book on personality types and emotional intelligence called Stop Being Yourself, as you mentioned. I suppose that's where I'm at. I'm splitting my time between both, and I have to say I'm enjoying the dynamic. And one of the things, if I was, but with moves, you're always nervous. If there's always, will this work? What am I doing? Am I leaving my legal practice behind? But sort of what has happened is they both have complemented each other. I think people kind of like my background in terms of, my main market is sort of financial services, professional services firms, and professional representative bodies. So it was a happy accident if I didn't necessarily plan it this way, but they kind of like that I have this professional background and I'm still in practice and I'm still exposed to that world. Yeah. So they work very well in tandem together. If I'm totally honest, would I love to pursue the training exclusively? I would, but I don't know what that future looks like yet, Aoife. Because people are always saying to me, Ronan, it's fantastic that you know what people are going through, etc. So I don't know. I'm just going to have to let it play out, but I'm enjoying it at the moment.
Brilliant. And I can totally relate to that whole thing of leaving what people refer to as a permanent pensionable. I've done that several times in my life, and people don't get it. They're like, "What do you mean? You're leaving this amazing career that you have to do something else?" I think there's a lot of people out there who they just don't get it. But I like this idea that you're on this journey of doing something that is going to bring you a lot more fulfillment in work. Maybe coming back to the book and the personality profiling, maybe an intro to, and this is what I liked about the book actually, is showing, and you explained it in a way that I haven't heard it explained before. So emotional intelligence and our personality and the subconscious together, and how those work together to reflect how we show up basically on a day-to-day basis in our interactions. And this is all relationship based as opposed to how, it's not how I'm interacting with myself, it's how I'm showing up in the world with other people when you see other people, because how many days are there where you don't show up and meet another person?
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. So if I suppose this all comes from reading, if like we're always standing on the shoulders of giants, as we're taking sort of little bits of information from different areas and different things that we read, and definitely I became really interested in how the subconscious mind affects what we do. So on a very regular and daily basis, I think there's this statistic out there, and you'll be familiar with this, that 95% of our daily actions come from the subconscious, i.e., we're not conscious of them, we're just doing them on autopilot.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, okay, I was exposed to a lot of personality stuff. I was doing it in the course of my work, but I think I hadn't really heard it sold from that perspective of, look, this is all coming from your subconscious. So I suppose you say in my introduction to my book, I sort of set the tone of that. And look, very crudely, Aoife, and this isn't something that, the listeners or yourself won't have heard before, but we form our personality probably mostly in the first 7 years of life. So we have these experiences, and it's learning how to navigate life. It's learning they talk about downloading these programs to help us, these computer programs to help us,
Yeah. The
to
operating
navigate.
system.
Yeah, exactly. So we have these experiences, life, and then we put them into a memory bank. And every time we encounter something similar to that, the subconscious mind fires these programs back out, and we wheel out the same sort of things that we've learned, and they come out in our behaviors. That we lodge these beliefs, and then the beliefs drive our emotional patterns and our behaviors. And it's terrifying and it's very liberating at the same time, Aoife, as am I really that predictable? Am I
Yeah.
really, I thought I was a special kind of an individual. But really, when you get into it, we know that there's a very set amount of motivations for the behaviors that we exhibit on a very daily basis. So I think when you accept that and you think that you're not special and that you haven't, it's just liberating if you think, okay,
Yeah.
I can get on with this journey of self-awareness. I can get on with this journey of understanding others and having real empathy for them, not a box ticking exercise. And it's liberating having that proper empathy for people. You're looking at people as, and this sounds a little bit cold or callous, but as programmed beings,
Yeah.
who are doing their best to navigate life and world. And I think the tone of my book brings that out, Aoife, that there's no bad people. We're just victims of circumstances
Yeah.
ultimately.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that I'm thinking as you're talking there, Ronan. One of them is this sense of I feel justified for the feelings that I have and for the behavior. And maybe people are afraid to confront that, well, I did this because that person did this to me or whatever it might be. And then the other thing that I was thinking was this idea of, well, everyone else is programmed as well, and we're all just kind of reacting to each other essentially. And
Sure.
that theme has come up on the podcast several times, that we're all basically just triggering each other for whatever wounds that we have from the past, and that they're all embedded from a very young age. I'm intrigued to understand a little bit more about you were saying there's only a handful of things that are at the root cause of all of these types of behaviors. Is that linked with the different personality
Oh,
profiles?
yeah, most definitely. So,
Yeah.
like for example, I call them motivations, and very simple. That's a very fancy way of saying why do we behave as we do?
Yeah.
What's the reason for it? And well, not every, but 9 personality types under the Enneagram each have their respective motivation. And if you to go back even further, what psychologists will call it defense mechanisms.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
these things that we developed in our childhood because we didn't have the emotional development to process it or feel
Yeah.
it. It
Yeah.
was overbearing. We didn't have this brain chemistry or the emotional wherewithal to process it and say, okay, that's okay. I'm hurt by this. I feel it. It doesn't feel pleasant. When we're young, we build this psychological structure to defend ourselves. And that's really what motivates our behaviors. And then crazily, we carry this into our adult lives and we carry
Yeah.
it into our corporate life. If I know that's the sort of the workplace, your speciality. And it's like children really running around crashing into each other. And look, if I don't say that in a condescending way, I'm not immune to it. I'm still triggered by certain
Yeah.
types. And,
We're all human.
yeah, absolutely. I bring it home at night. I'm upset by it. I'm angry. I feel worthless at times because of it. I feel very vulnerable at times because of it. But that's the thing. It's just this cycle, and we're all just trying to improve that. But if I can give you a couple of examples, if that would suit you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like how they show up, and if I suppose I'd like to select a couple of the types, and again, this is not a judgment as to them; it's just unfortunately the way the corporate world and the workplace has evolved.
Well, this is it. I'm curious about that because I know before this conversation you were saying we're not going to go into all of the different nine
Mm,
types. There is just no time to be able to do that. And
sure.
definitely check out Ronan's book if you want to explore any of these
Thank
concepts
you.
further. Um, but I'm looking at the types and I'm thinking I'm curious to know which ones you're going to bring up because we haven't talked about which ones we're going to talk about. And I have an idea of which ones are going to come up. And I think people who are listening are really going to relate to whatever comes up because they're probably so typical of the either ourselves and we can recognize ourselves in it,
Absolutely.
or we can recognize other people in what comes up. And again, it's not a judgment. It's just this is how it is, and this is what we learned before the age of 7. This
Absolutely.
is how we learn to cope in the world, essentially.
Absolutely. And so if I just to preface all of this by saying if anyone's saying he's on his high horse, I exhibit a lot of the traits of two of these characters. So I'm putting my hand up here, if and saying, look, if you're thinking, no, that's me, and I'm a bit hurt that he's bringing these up, I'm this person as well.
Yeah.
So, and I'll go into that when we're chatting about these. But I want to talk about the perfectionist, Aoife,
Yeah.
number one.
Mm-hmm.
And I see you laughing, so I think you're predicting all of this. The performer, who is the success orientated individual,
Yeah.
very goal orientated performance machine. And lastly, the boss. So the
Yeah.
boss is your typical CEO, Aoife. That's the
Mm.
individual who very, very action orientated, can be lacking in empathy at times,
Okay.
and doesn't have an off switch. But I suppose to firstly give you an overview, if so that the sort of hallmark indicators of who these types might be and what they might be. So perfectionist, and perfectionist is one that we see in the media all the time,
Mm.
and one of the things is people are there's a broad spectrum of personality types that people attribute to a perfectionist. And I wrote an article on this on LinkedIn. I have a number of articles there on these topics, and look, it's fantastic that people are investigating this stuff and want to understand others. But I think at times there's a misconception about stuff that mix up motivations, and it's the
Mm.
same for introverts. And I even think, and if I know you're an expert in this, imposter syndrome, for
Mm.
example, there's always different motivations for
Yeah.
why we might be feeling imposter syndrome, for example.
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry, just to get back to the
But
perfectionism.
I was thinking the same because as I was reading about the perfectionist, I was like, this so relates to imposter syndrome, and we're not going to go down that road today. But
Sure.
maybe separately, I can do an exploration of that link and that
Excellent.
motivation of perfectionism and how it relates to imposter syndrome. In fact, with a lot of the different personality types, I could see how it relates to imposter syndrome actually. So yeah, as an aside, let's get back to
Interesting.
the
No, that's very
perfectionist.
interesting. So thank you. Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. So firstly, the perfectionists. So they are as great synthesizers of information. Their focus of attention on the world is they want to be right. They are always focusing on the right way to do things.
Mm.
They are very orderly in how they do things. They like doing things a certain way. They say about perfectionists that they like principles, not people. Um, how they exhibit and how they show up and how you'd recognize them. Generally speaking, they are quite thin and lean people.
Mm.
When they are getting a little bit tense or they're a little bit serious, you can see their jaw tightening quite a bit. They talk about shoulds. You should be doing this. They're advising you constantly. That's their talk style. They'll
Mm.
use their index finger to direct you what you
Okay,
should
yeah,
be doing.
yeah.
They uh, they dress quite appropriately as well. They're quite conservative in how they dress, and they sit properly. They'll always sit quite straight, and they're quite stiff of themselves. Actually, now
Mm.
to think about why they present like that, if it, they're always thinking for the right way to do things. They have quite a lot of unresolved anger, perfectionists. And
Mm.
why is that? Because they suppress anger. Remember, it's not the right way to behave.
Okay, yeah.
So it radiates out in tension. So, for example, and if let's put that into a leadership perspective, you have a perfectionist who is brilliant at their job. They are really precise about how they go about things, really orderly, really committed, and really principled, ethical people. Let me just say that as
Mm.
well. But you have a junior who is very keen to please. And then you have this scowling perfectionist looking at them, judging them, criticizing them. Because remember, in their head, their unconscious focus is, I'm aiming to do the right thing. I want it to
Mm.
be right. I will need to be right.
Yeah.
This is where their head goes. and they have this poor junior in front of them who's looking for a little bit of praise. And perfectionists never praise people. They never say that was a brilliant job, because remember, they haven't found the right way. They're always at, perfectionism. They're always aiming for
They
that.
can find the mistakes in anything.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. They're always reforming. People call them reforming junkies. They just love improving stuff. It's
Yeah.
not. Um, so let me go on to the performer, and I'll do a little asterisk at this, because I may or may not share lots of the performer characteristics. So they focus their attention on success and maintaining a successful image. They are very hardworking. They are goal orientated. They are positive motivators of people. They have this emotional intelligence as to what the people need to hear to be able to motivate them. They call them the chameleons of the Enneagram. They are those people that can change, like chameleon changes color depending on the environment and depending what is needed. They're able really quickly to change. In terms of spotting a perfectionist, weird thing a perfectionist does is when they're listening
The
to someone.
performer.
Sorry, my apologies. The performer, thank you. Their eyes modify. Um, so when you're speaking to a performer and they are trying to work out what you need to hear, their eyes will just be modifying all the time, just click, click, click from side to side. And it's a very striking bit of body language. It's just a real common telltale of um they very often have this kind of block head, and that sounds very, not very desirable, but and symmetrical features.
Yeah.
It's just the look that they have. They also know how to dress, if it depending on what is required. So if it's depending on the look of an organization or a particular profession, they will have it down to a T.
Yeah.
They will be really fit in, and they will look nearly better than others. They're really into what the image should be. Um, they have there's a confident pose as well, and in terms of talk style, if they're very assured, very confident, and they'll always be kind of trying to woo you with their achievements. They're
Yeah.
in a very subtle sort of semi-boastful way.
Yeah.
They will be delivering this kind of, as I say, trying to woo you with their achievements. So we're going to move on then to the boss, Aoife. The boss is, just to sort of give this a headline, they focus their attention on being strong and in control. They are your typical male or female who is CEO, typically the leaders. I'd say there's more bosses as leaders in somewhere like America than anywhere else. They are just your typical pickup personality that will be in that. They're action orientated. They have this physical aura about them, Aoife. So separate, they share lots of characteristics of the performer, but you feel an eight when they're sitting beside you. It's a type eight, the boss. You feel their energy.
Yeah.
Even when they're quiet in a room, you feel their energy. In terms of identifying features, they have these probing eyes. So when you're talking to a type eight, you feel like they're going through you basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
But do
they
you
have
feel like you're
this.
the only person in the room or the only person in the world when they're looking at you? They just make you
uh,
feel like, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. No, that's a much more elegant way of saying it. There,
But no, I think it's a nice way to describe it as well. This, like, it's almost boring through that you're like, whoa,
absolutely.
I know you're looking at me.
It is. No, absolutely. And if they have this funny walk about them, I know not all of the recordings of this will be visual as well, but picture, but their sort of shoulders rock side. So I would call it a saunter. It's this kind of, try me type thing, this
Okay, like a
confidence, this.
swagger almost, is
Yeah,
it?
absolutely a swagger, totally a
Okay,
swagger.
yeah,
And it's for male or females.
yeah,
It doesn't matter. They have this poise and confidence, and if they're in a conflict scenario, it'll be like, what's the best you have? They
yeah,
are just totally at ease.
yeah.
Now, one of the things that again, just to go back to um the performer and the boss, a performer will be very good at motivating, and they will be positive. They're really, really positive. The boss is more of a challenger.
Okay,
And if you stand up to a boss and if you have the wherewithal to look them in the eye and answer their questions directly, and you're not intimidated by them, you'll be on their team then.
Yeah. Okay.
Whereas a performer is more put your arm around someone's shoulder and say, they're interested in you being the best that you can possibly be.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're kind of I'm sorry, just one thing about talk style. If a boss talks in declaratives, in absolute statements of truth,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
so you might be listening to someone thinking, how could they be so confident about that?
Mm.
How in everything they do, it just sounds like, total and utter gospel or
Yeah.
gospel,
Yeah.
the truth of, it's just how they communicate.
Okay.
And yeah,
I've
absolutely.
met people like that, and you believe everything they say, even if they're not right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
No, you do, and I suppose it's part of their strength as on the leadership journey.
Yeah.
Um, so if that kind of is an overview of how they present,
Yeah.
of kind of the strengths that they bring to it. And then I suppose, and if I've heard you on a number of podcasts talking about we need to leverage our strengths, and that's
Yeah.
I totally agree with it, Eva. I think
Mm.
we need to know our strengths. I know you mentioned spreadsheets the last day one of the things I picked up on as an example. You're really comfortable with spreadsheets and
Yeah.
you're really good at it, and you can, you're probably really fast and efficient with it, and just enjoy the energy that it produces. Spreadsheets are a big part of my legal work as well, Aoife, but they
Mm.
stress me out.
Okay.
I
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel anxious during them. I'm like,
Yeah.
I can't wait to get this over.
Yeah.
Um, and but they're a very necessary part of my job. But it just, how different we all are. But to move over then, if it, say you're on your leadership journey, or just, navigating work as a typical employee,
Mm.
over reliance on your strengths, over reliance on, these things often lead to neurotic behavior. They
Yeah.
lead to, the bullying, the harassment, the things that trigger people. And, to use our few examples again, the perfectionist. So they go from striving for perfection, from, looking at synthesizing information wonderfully well, at making sure others come up to their high standards. Then they're overly critical,
Yeah.
they're impatient, they
Mm.
can be very resentful of people when they're not up to their high standards, and they alienate their team because they focus on perfection and not
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think I mentioned at the start, if it, it sounds, when we're talking about this, just in now, it sounds like sort of very like touch, but when you are on someone's team that is leading like that, it's
Yeah.
devastating.
Mm.
Because say you're new to a job, maybe your last job hasn't gone so well, and I've been there, you're feeling a bit insecure about stuff, you want to make a good impression, and you have this perfectionist looking at you who has a grimace. A perfectionist always nearly has one eyebrow up because they're trying to work out the right way to do things. That's
Mm.
the unconscious process in their mind, you know, and you're not helping. You're new, you don't have a clue what you're at in terms of the job as yet.
Mm.
You're trying to work things out. You want a little bit of feedback saying, well done, that was
Yes.
fantastic. And it just doesn't come.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And again, it's not because they're bad people, it's the way they're programmed. If it's
Mm.
just, potentially devastating. And in terms of the motivation for that behavior, touched on it, they believe there's only one right way to do things,
Yeah.
which is a very, very, it's a very difficult sort of cross to bear, if
To
it
find that one right way and be
absolutely.
always looking for that one right
Exactly.
answer, the one way to do it. And yeah, no, that's totally relatable. And then I think from the book you were talking about being in an accountancy field, for example, as the like, well, there's one right way to do this. I'm either right or I'm wrong. It's black or it's white.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
It does. And if more than anyone that you can't take that approach with people. People are
Mm,
so different, people are not black and white. We're not just rational beings, we're emotional beings. So
mm.
it doesn't really work. But exactly, the accountancy is such a good example of just that, I want just to stay in this
The books
world.
have to balance, and if they don't balance,
Yeah,
then it's wrong. Yeah, yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly. So to go on then to the performer, and the performer is your success orientated individual that I spoke about. They can become ultra competitive. So, for
mm,
example, when their success image is threatened, they can become ultra competitive. They're very image conscious, and they have this disregard for emotions. So this relentless charge towards success even just leads to a dehumanizing of their team. They're ultimately the team that's working under them as
yeah,
under their leadership. They're just a statistic.
Yeah.
because
They're numbers. They might be they're a robot. They're just there to do a job, and that's it. Yeah.
absolutely,
Mm.
absolutely. So when a three is locked in a project and they're striving for that successful completion or goal, excuse me, um, they shut off their own emotions, and to a degree, if it's a strange kind of a thing, it's what makes them so capable.
Yeah.
They just are
It's
able to
how they
cut.
get results.
Exactly. They cut off
Mm.
their emotions and they go for it.
Yeah.
Now, what happens to that emotions that they push down? They're going to get the result in a few years, even, because they're workaholics.
Mm.
It's going to come out in some sort of physical manifestation
Yeah.
eventually. Through heart conditions, through whatever it may be. Whatever sort of physical manifestation it is, there's and the motivation for this behavior, and always go back to these motivations because I think for me, they're really important in arresting whatever emotion you are triggered by these people. You think to yourself, okay, I need to go back to why are they doing this?
Mm.
What is the motivation for their behavior? Now, their success, of course, they're always striving for success, but why do they need to be successful?
Yeah.
They need to be successful because they feel worthless without it. So
Mm.
if you're a type three, and it's probably, this is one of the things that I had to discover along the way. When I found out that I exhibited lots of type three behaviors, and I found out, okay, so when I'm feeling upset in work, generally speaking, it's because or anxious, it's because of an underlying of emotion of worthlessness.
Mm.
And I was thinking to myself, worthless, but I'm, in the relational world, and I'm confident and happy to speak, and I don't feel. But really, when my back is up against the wall and I'm disappointed and I haven't, presented as doing something really successfully, worthlessness is what I'm feeling.
Mm.
And it's an amazing realization, even when you think, okay, that's what it is. So I have to take this and move forward with it.
Yeah.
And it's liberating.
Yeah.
It's like I'm taking these things from my childhood. What is a typical childhood of a performer, Aoife? It's you were giving lots of praise for successful
Yeah.
performance.
Yes.
Good boy, good girl. That was fantastic. How
Yeah.
were you in school today? That's a great award. Did you
Yeah.
win that race? It's this is the programming that
Yeah.
faces that.
There's but there's something interesting in the language that you used there, Ronan, that I just want to highlight.
Sure.
And it's this idea of presenting as. So it's not just the success, it's the successful image that we are presenting to the world. And this image may be even in conflict with how we feel inside, because inside we don't feel like we've achieved the success that we want to achieve. But the important thing is that we're presenting the outward image of success to people who are looking.
Yeah, if you've hit the nail on the head with the performer, it's that they talk about them having a lack of authenticity. And
Mm.
that's why people don't like them in the workplace. They don't think they're real people. They are a projection of some form of image. And if I can relate to that, when I look back at my own motivations for things, when I look at, for example, why I chose law, and I find this sort of musing very interesting.
Well, it's interesting because I didn't know this about you, Ronan, and that's coming through in the book, because a lot of the examples I think are related to that, and they're so relatable because of people's perception of law and the legal profession, I think.
Oh, absolutely. So I suppose if I think to myself, and this is when I first started on the Enneagram journey myself, I was thinking, why did I pick law then? Like, did I think at 16 or 17 I would be good at reviewing documents? I would be good in court? Of
Yeah.
course not. I had an uncle who was a barrister, Aoife. He had a lot of respect. People, that's the way society is. The higher your sort of your badge or your thing, people respect you more. And I just wanted that. And that's the
Mm.
truth. And that's the nature of threes. They want this successful image. They want
Yeah.
the high societal position. No greater analysis than that. And it's frightening, that these unconscious motivations set us on this lifelong journey of who's to say whether it's going to be enjoyable or not.
Yeah.
Um, so then moving on to the boss, if the boss, just to say it can I suppose there's two elements to narcissism. There is the control and the sort of very aggressive side to narcissism, and then there's the other side, which is the sort of carefree, fun, outgoing, but hate commitment and have no disregard for others' feelings to a degree. I think the type 8 is one of the people that are the control focused. So They can become very impatient when they're over focusing on their typical strengths. And they have this total inability to show vulnerability, Aoife. And why do they have this inability to show vulnerability? Because it's too painful. Again, it goes back to their childhood, which I'll touch on. But ultimately, type 8s create this very intimidating, underperforming workplace for people when they're in a bad place, when they over focus on their strengths, and when they never take their foot off the gas, when they never have proper empathy for people, and when they step over people, to achieve their own gains. And just to draw a little comparison even between the boss and the performer in terms of their emotional presentation, the performer will switch off their emotions and they'll be robotic. Or else they will put their arm around you and they'll know how to charm you into reaching that goal. The boss is different. They're very, very comfortable with anger. Much of what they say will be presented with anger. They go from 0 to 60 in 5 seconds. From just sitting normally to very, very in your face. And they're a challenger. Another name for the boss is a challenger. They will constantly challenge you. And look, I suppose it goes without saying, for the sort of destructive effect that may have on people in the workplace. We're all at different levels of security, and particularly when this person is your boss. And a very common thing when I'm taking these the training, if people would say, is that the person that is lovely and charming to their senior bosses, but then when it comes to us, they will scream and shout at us? And yes, that is that person.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, they know they're very strategic. They can see the big picture. But when it comes to the people below them, you have to walk their walk. Talking about how they form this sort of desire and need to be constantly in control. Generally speaking, they have a childhood of being physically dominated by a physically stronger individual. And what happens, they show their vulnerability in their childhood, Aoife. And what happens when they show their vulnerability? They're mocked for crying. They're mocked for, I think of actually just Ronaldo crying recently in the media. Sort of this attack, oh, how pathetic is that?
Yeah.
Like we've come a long way, but not really a long way. Aoife, for whatever reason Ronaldo's crying, he's upset. So they have this thing where when it comes to life and when it comes to work, they need to be in control, because if they're not in control, there's a chance that they'll feel that vulnerability again, that they'll show that people will not be honest and truthful and upfront with them. So it's better just to be in complete control and micromanage people and go roughshod over people.
Okay, yeah. The micromanager is coming out here. Oh,
Sure.
I definitely want to explore a lot of those different I suppose this as a tool in a lot more detail. Obviously there's not a huge amount of time to do that today.
Sure.
But it's interesting because I can relate to two of the types, actually, similar to what you had mentioned yourself. And I'd be curious to know, from what you know about me, maybe the limited information or what you've heard on a podcast or seen on social media, I'd be curious if you have any thoughts about what type I am from what you've seen.
Sure. And if I just to preface this by saying, like, unless people ask me, I never offer this. Because it's a very personal journey. I'm not so much into psychometric tests, I have to say. I think it's a and you mentioned this in quite a few of your podcasts, Eva. This is a lifelong journey of self-discovery. There's lots of different layers. And for someone to tell you within 10 minutes who you are, it doesn't mean very much.
It's a label, and you have that labal for life then.
Exactly.
It can feel like that.
Exactly. So from what you've described, and now considering there's also wings for all of our types. So it's a bit like other types where you either side, if you're a number on the Enneagram wheel, you have a certain number that you're going to exhibit those behaviors as well. But the fact that you have a very analytical mind, Aoife, the fact that you're really into your the spreadsheets, etc., and that you're very organized, etc. I have in mind a type 1 who is the perfectionist, or a type 6 who is the devil's advocate.
Okay. Interesting.
These have these amazing analytical minds that are able to review things. they have this relentless pursuit for satisfying themselves before they move on. And if I don't
Okay.
know if you're one of those people, but they're the people in your work, Aoife, who ask loads of questions about things and they're comfortable asking the questions.
Yeah.
When someone like me who can be impatient and is goal orientated, I need people like that on my side
Yeah.
because they stop me from making, catastrophic mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
They save me from doing silly things.
Yeah.
But they also can suffer from sort of analysis paralysis.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And they overfixate on the detail and they're always looking this certainty. What's their background? The type six. Type six thinks it's a fairly dangerous world we're living in. They're skeptical
Okay.
about people. They have a
Yeah.
sixth sense about people, though, if it.
Yeah.
They have this sort of background history of maybe being in an uncertain family unit, so they were always
Mm.
trying to predict people's behaviors, and that translates into their adult life and about they're skeptical and they're doubtful and they're actually always searching for certainty
Yeah. Yeah.
in their life, but they're scanning their environment for dangers very often.
Yeah. That's so interesting because so I took an online and it was paid as well. So you kind of when you pay for this stuff you sort of expect that it's going to be right. And the result I got was a very strong 3, but also with a 1.
Okay.
So I'm
Okay.
not surprised about the 1 because when I
Okay.
read your book, I was like, hello, I can totally relate to this 1. Like, that is
Yeah.
me right there. And when
Sure.
I read the 3, I was like, yeah, I have a little bit of that, but I don't have all of the kind of characteristics. The
Yes.
6, I don't know an awful lot about. So I feel like I should kind of read into that. I think for me, I definitely relate to the perfectionist tendencies. I think from the 3, it's the projected image of success and the goal orientation, and I want to achieve, and I'm driven to achieve at all costs sometimes. But
Sure.
like we're saying, it's a journey, and so I can sort of see how. And I don't know, does your Enneagram type change over time or what the story is, or is it all a journey that this is your foundation and your core motivation? But once you start to understand a little bit about yourself, you can bring in some more of the strengths of the other types.
If that's a really important question, does it? And that comes up all the time. People say, I
Mm,
change, I'm different in work, I'm different at home. And this is what the Enneagram says. The Enneagram says that our core personality never changes.
yeah,
Now, do we have different elements of other personality types? Of course we do. Our
yeah,
parents, for example. So what's my example of that? My core is a type 8,
yeah,
and I have the 3 from my parents.
yeah.
And it took a while to work that out. I
Okay, yeah,
thought my
yeah,
core was a 3
yeah,
initially,
yeah,
and even the teacher that I did it with, who was a Vedantin monk, very learned and educated guy, he thought I was a 3.
yeah,
But working through it, ultimately, if I've discovered that I'm a certain subtype of an 8, and
yeah,
then the 3 things are a sort of add-on. Um, Other things that might throw you off track are the wings, of course. So we
yeah.
have different elements from them. And then there's also with under the Enneagram, not to get too complicated, we go to a certain number in stress and we go to a
Ah,
certain number in growth.
yes,
So,
okay,
um, so it's just interesting.
yeah,
One of the things about a 3, if it is, and this is maybe resonates with you, they go to 6 in growth.
okay, yeah, yeah,
So they learn to trust themselves, that they
yeah.
have that inner radar. They no longer
Mm,
need to project an image based on what is successful in a particular field.
yeah.
They trust themselves,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
and they're confident to walk on their own path.
Yeah.
So look, is it in one way a very simple formula for sort of growth? In another way, it's inordinately complicated, and
Yes.
there's a lifetime of learning in it.
This is it. And that's kind of what's coming through is it's not a cut and dried, you take a quiz and there you have all the answers. And maybe that's the kind of person I am, that I want to have the answer. There's one right way, Ronan. Did you know there's one right way? There's
Very
one
good.
right answer to this. This is the perfectionist coming out.
Sure.
But I think it's about understanding ourselves. Really, at the core of it, it's not about labeling yourself. It's about understanding yourself, being on this journey. What are maybe some of the things that you are blind to? What are you motivated by, based on, essentially, fundamentally based on your childhood pre 7 years old? What is it that you're actually here to try and achieve or cover up or present to the world or whatever it might
Absolutely.
be. I'm also really interested in understanding the relationship on a team. So I'm kind of thinking if there are these 9 different types, then and we have a team of say 4 or 5 people, like you're not going to have a team of 9 people to represent every single one of those types. But maybe can we talk about some of the conflicts that arise at work? You have mentioned some of them already, like if there's
Sure.
someone who is goal orientated and trying to get stuff done, which is the number 3, and then they encounter a number 6, and the number 6 is asking a lot of devil's advocate questions, saying, "But what about this scenario? What about this scenario?" In some ways, it's good, but then the overuse of the strengths, and I've talked about this before, is
Uh,
when your strengths become a weakness essentially
sure.
because you use it too much.
Mm.
But having this awareness of it's not all drive, 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 and it's not all analysis paralysis, but finding the balance. But any other sort of conflicts that might arise based on the different personality types that people might recognize in themselves or others?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. If I want to just before I get into giving specific examples, one of the things I do when the team dynamics and high performing teams, you have all these fancy names for effectively, we have problems with our teams. How do we help? So I
Yeah.
introduced the Enneagram to it. If and one of the things that I do is right, we're going to do a mock meeting here exactly as you would do in work, and we're going to take on different roles. So the typical type one perfectionist who is always advising on the processes, let's stick to this process, what we should do, this is the best way to do it, and gets very tense about, when people veer from that,
Yeah.
they take on a more sort of questioning role of finding out, whether people are happy
Ah,
about things. They have
okay.
to ask questions, they have to
Oh, interesting.
investigate.
Getting buy-in from others, getting
Yeah,
input,
absolutely.
yeah,
And
okay.
explore, why people are doing things as
Yeah.
opposed to immediately jumping into advising.
Yeah,
The
this is
type
how we should do it. This is the right way to do it. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Absolutely. The type two then is the giver, and they're the person that is always concerned about other people. They're happiest when they are helping others and assisting others. And they have to flip roles into someone that is a little bit more selfish and just to advise, a bit like the type one,
Yeah.
this is what we need to do, this is the process that we need to follow.
Yeah.
The type three, of course, the performer, and I'll not go through all of them, just to give a few examples of the kind of
Yeah.
the roles that shift. The type three is, of course, this person who's dying to get to the goals, and they keep everyone on track, and they're like, no, let's focus on what we're doing. They have to go off piste a little bit. They have to be a little bit more creative. They have to take a breather occasionally. They don't need to always
Mm,
be in control and
yeah.
dictating the tempo of things, and they have to come up with creative solutions for stuff. They have to allow themselves that time not to be, focused on the end line all of the time. So it's a very interesting exercise, and I would invite anyone like yourself, Eva, who is a trainer, and anyone that's watching that's in this, who's in management or whatever, to try it.
Mm,
Even for a meeting, just to say, look, let's swap roles here
yeah.
occasionally, and
Yeah, yeah.
because you notice patterns even in how people do things.
Yeah.
But in terms of clashing, it's a funny one because for example, the perfectionist despises people that doesn't stay on what was agreed. So
Oh.
if there's a process for doing something,
Yeah.
and
I'm
they will
laughing
clash.
every time you mention the perfectionist. Something like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, that's me.
And
Yeah,
if,
yeah.
by the way, just to put my hands up, my mother, I have perfectionism from my mother's side, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
I haven't really discussed that with her, but I definitely do.
Yeah,
I can feel the resentment building in me when I feel that someone isn't doing something the way that it should be or what was
yeah,
agreed, or that burning nasty feeling that we get. But a type seven is the optimist, and they hate being tied down to
yeah.
stuff. They love being creative. They're storytellers. They're fun. They're charismatic, but they have this habit of not following through on things
Oh,
because
yeah,
they find
okay.
it boring. They hate
Yeah.
the end of projects. They hate processes. They hate being limited in any way. They love to keep all of their options open. So a
Mm,
seven and a one can infuriate each other actually, and
mm,
it's reciprocated both ways
yeah.
because a one will constantly be saying, "We agreed in week one to do it this way. Why are you going off on another irrelevant tangent?" The seven's
Yeah,
thinking, my God, this person is so boring and frustrating, and
yeah.
they're really dampening my creativity and my ability to be a fast, agile thinker. There's this clash. Um, the type two then, as I said, is the giver. And type 2 and 9s can have a funny sort of, or sorry, type 2 and 8s have a
Yeah.
funny relationship. Eights, and I'm an eight myself. If eights are very self-referencing, they're single-minded, they're selfish,
Mm.
they're very driven on what they want to do. You know, it's one of the big learnings for me. If I've had to do lots of stuff around, you know, taking a step back and thinking to myself, okay, you know, you need to consider other people. You know, it's
Yeah.
the world we live in. It's not a very pleasant thing to admit, but it's just a part of me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, twos are all about everyone else. Twos love that everyone's looked after, that everyone's voice is heard, that everyone feels comfortable in a group, and that there's a great team environment. Eights don't care about that. They are just, you know, I'm gonna big strategic thinker here, and I'm just gonna plow ahead.
Yeah.
There's a clash between them,
Yeah.
and the type twos are very people orientated people, but they can be vociferous when they need to be.
Yeah.
You know, they can get pretty antsy when they feel
Okay.
people
When
aren't
the
looked
people aren't
after.
being looked after or whatever.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you may, as if you're considering one, you may have a large amount of two in you.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes
Um,
sense. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the performer, you know, they can actually clash quite a bit with fours. Fours are the individualist. They're a
Mm.
very unique individual. They see have an identity as being different from everyone.
Okay.
Very,
Yeah. Yeah.
very emotionally
Like a
sensitive.
rebel almost.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. They can be very rebellious.
Yeah.
Um, they are creative people, so
Mm.
they like some sort of creative thing in their work, some sort of artistic bent to everything they do. But they're mad about authenticity, Aoife.
Mm.
And they have this radar for people when someone is presenting something that doesn't quite tally exactly like a type three. So the three is this
Okay.
projected
Yeah.
image of
Yes.
themselves. The
Yeah.
four is this very, you know, be real with me, you know,
Yeah.
be straight with me, you know, that sort of a thing. And they can clash quite a lot because
Okay.
it's
Interesting.
a total two different total styles. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, there's plenty of opportunity for conflict.
So that's how conflict happens from a personality perspective. But then, is it really just about raising awareness of this is why I am the way I am, and having an understanding of people's different personality styles in order to understand them and where they're coming from in order to resolve the conflict?
It is, if it's very, and I have to agree with that. It's very education's so powerful.
Mm.
You know, when I'm in with working with groups, one of the things that gives me such a buzz is seeing the relief and you get lots of giggles during it because
Yeah.
they're like,
Yeah. Yeah.
ah, that's what that lady is doing. That's what that
Yeah.
man is doing. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like I now understand that, and it's the big thing about not taking this stuff personally. Then people
Yeah.
can take a breath and go, oh, okay, they're just a programmed individual doing
Yeah.
these things, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's the educational part of it is very powerful. And I suppose when you're dealing with them, Aoife, you know what their wounds are.
Yeah.
With a perfectionist, don't tell them they're wrong. You
Yeah.
know, like
Yeah.
one of the things in I find in negotiations, especially in legal negotiations, there's lots of perfectionists in law.
Yeah.
And people
Which makes
specialize in
sense.
saying,
Yeah.
yeah, it does, doesn't it? The way you review documents that are very precise.
Yeah.
Um, people start negotiations by saying, you are completely wrong about that. And it's like taking a dagger and putting it into a poor perfectionist's heart.
Yeah.
So when we know what their wounds are, when we know what their special thing that their motivations for their behavior, we learn not to implicate or to damage their self-image.
Mm.
You know, we become a little bit more skillful with the language we use with people. And I'm not talking about manipulation to get your best ends.
Yeah.
I just mean you're careful with what you say to people.
You're talking to their motivators as
Absolutely.
opposed to going against their motivator by saying to a perfectionist, you know, that's totally wrong, or you're wrong, or you got that wrong, or that's not
Exactly.
the right way to do it, or whatever.
Absolutely.
Like, I
Exactly that.
failed. Yeah.
Exactly that. And if, I know you had a really interesting conversation with the lady on the disc personality podcast. You know, I found that, of course, very interesting for my
Yeah.
own. You were speaking about don't speak to people or treat people as they want to be treated, not
Yeah.
as you want to be treated. You know, and it's the
Yes.
exact same premise.
Yeah.
It's knowing, you know, how to navigate people and how to skillfully navigate. I always use that term, skillfully navigate
Love
people.
that.
It's
Yeah.
not manipulation. It's
Yeah.
actually dealing with people to get the best out of them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an important one.
There's one last question I want to ask before we wrap things up, and it's something else I picked up from something that you said, and this is the idea of being ashamed of the type that you are. So if you are labeled as a perfectionist, for example, we'll use me as an example. If you're labeled as a perfectionist and there's all of these negative attributes that are associated with that, and you feel a sense of shame because of your childhood, because of whatever it might be, how do we address those kinds of issues that, like, if I feel ashamed of the type that I am? And I suppose given the idea that there's no one right personality, that it pains me to say that, by the way.
Yeah.
There's no one right personality, and they all have their specific attributes and things like that. But what if someone finds out they're listening today and they identify with one, or they take an online test or whatever it might be, or they're in a classroom with you, and they're like, oh, I don't want to be that type, I don't see myself that way, or whatever it might be. Any thoughts on how to address those types of issues?
And I think that's a really, really good question, Eva. I've been through this, the shame, you put it so well. I don't think there's any easy answer for it, Eva.
Okay.
It's a necessary part of growth.
Yeah,
Growth, if you're not feeling slightly uncomfortable on your growth journey, there's something
that's a
wrong.
good point. Yes. Yeah.
You
You're
have to
not
go through it.
growing.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
You have to process it.
Yeah.
And one of the things, Aoife, that at times I find a little bit difficult about my work is I present the warts and all
Yeah.
personality. I mean, most
Mm.
of the other personality frameworks are nicely polished and
Yeah.
presented to corporate life. Can say, that's me. That's
Yeah.
interesting. I'm
Yeah.
delighted with all my
I'm so
experience.
happy.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a high functioning member of this sort of team. And for me, it's just a matter of getting through it and process it and doing all the things that you do to live a balanced life. If it
Mm.
help, your meditation. I think for me, volunteering was helpful to give me a different perspective on things, because I suppose this shame is attributed to that's not the type of attributes that you need in corporate life or in a
Yeah.
workplace.
Yeah.
It's very much tied to that. And I think for me, I needed to get my head away from my whole life and identity is work.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
divorce yourself a little bit from that, if
Yeah.
it begins, you begin to sort of it, your belief that you need to be a certain way softens, I think. And I think very important for me was really learning the motivations and where they came from. So I had
Yeah.
this, the need to be in control, um, or else because I want to avoid feeling vulnerable. And where did I get that from in my childhood? I think those things loosen the grip on your beliefs then, and you're
Yeah.
like, okay, I can start to work through this. It feels pretty, excuse my French, a bit crappy. It
Yeah.
feels uncomfortable, Lisa. I'm
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
feeling good here, but it's a part of it. I
Yeah.
would love to be able to say, here's the solution for you
Yeah. Yeah.
when you're working through this.
Yeah.
But it's the nature of growth, Lisa, and you know
Yeah.
this. It's not
Yeah.
easy.
So it's, if I'm reading between the lines here, it's small steps, and it's like, so if I'm thinking about the 8 type in particular and the vulnerability piece, and you showed vulnerability when you were younger and you were mocked and bullied and whatever that might be, whatever that looks like, and then it's about showing a small level of vulnerability maybe to one person, and then to a larger group when you have some success doing that, and then it's kind of expands and expands, and you become more comfortable with being vulnerable in different situations.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a
Mm.
really good way of putting it. If I hadn't formulated it that way, but yes, most definitely.
That's the synopsis. Perfectionism in me coming out right now. I can, I can. That's something I can do quite easily. I don't know
Very good.
how, but yeah. Um. Anyway, Ronan, I've absolutely loved this conversation. We could probably talk all day about the 9 different types and the interactions and all of that kind of thing. But I would love to know, what does being happier at work mean to you?
Yeah, I think that's pretty simple. It's probably at the risk of repeating something. It's not taking people personally.
Mm.
Being a type 8, there's a funny mix. There's a large gaping vulnerability underneath my tough, action orientated shell.
Yeah.
So when people aren't as you want them to be, you can be sensitive to it.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so what the Enneagram has brought for me and all of my writing the book and teaching it, it's all my own journey of practice, I think.
Mm.
Um, is not taking people personally. So you can go in, people may be acting in a disagreeable manner, but you're able to stand back and have a little bit of distance and say, okay, they're just acting on autopilot here.
Mm.
I don't have to take it personally. And it gives
Yeah.
you that little bit of distance, Aoife, that you're not
Mm.
bringing this stuff home with you.
Yeah. And we won't obviously get into detail on this now.
Mm.
But I have had a conversation about self-awareness, and from what you're saying, it's when we uncover this awareness about ourselves, then we can start to grow. So until we have that awareness, we're still operating in that autopilot mode, subconscious decisions, and from something from a very young age, when we had one of these 9 motivators embedded into our ways of showing up in the world.
No, absolutely. And I think I watched that podcast about awareness
Yeah.
that you're talking about with a lady, her name escapes me.
Dr. Nia Thomas.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
she had this lovely sort of toolkit of observing. I can't remember exactly the 3 steps you mentioned, but I remember
Yeah.
thinking, yeah, that resonates.
There
And it
was
is,
the 3 levels, yeah,
wasn't
where
there? Yeah,
you're understanding and then reflecting and then modifying your behavior,
yes,
essentially. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's it really sums it up perfectly. You educate yourself based on your personality type. So what are the emotional patterns? What are my typical behaviors? And then you go into this observing stage where you're observing yourself. And eventually, if you catch yourself in the act,
Mm.
and that subconscious element comes into your conscious awareness, and it's like,
Yeah.
I'm free from that.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. I can see myself doing that
Yeah,
now.
I can get to choose
Yeah.
now.
Mm.
And that term catching yourself in the act comes from
Yeah.
one of the most famous Enneagram authors. And it's a lovely, simple way of putting it.
Yeah, really like that. Really like that. So, if people want to connect with you, Ronan, if they want to find out more about what you do, the Enneagram, your book, what's the best place that they can do that?
Yeah, my email address and of a website, www.stopbeingyourself.ie. And then my email address is info@stopbeingyourself.ie.
Brilliant, love that. And that's also the name of the book, Stop Being Yourself. And I love that because it's quite arresting, isn't it? You're like, what? I thought I was supposed to be myself, but now you're telling me to stop being myself? Okay.
Absolutely, it is. It can be a controversial one, Aoife, but
Yes, absolutely. But thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed the conversation today. And thank you so much for your time and
I
sharing your
appreciate
insights and your wisdom.
I appreciate the conversation, Aoife. Thanks very much.